We've got an exciting topic for you tonight on edible flowers. I want to also remind you that if you're interested in the Master Gardener program, we are going to start up our Master Gardener program in person this year again, coming this fall. And we have a day and an evening program, which makes our program very unique in Middlesex County. Plus, we have a large, beautiful garden. So if you're interested in the Middlesex County Master Gardener program, you can contact us at 732-398-5278 or mastergardeners@co.middlesex.nj.us. And that's an in-person program starting this September. We have a lot of wonderful volunteers that work with us through the Master Gardener program. So without further ado, we're going to get started with Angela Monahan, who is our Master Gardener Coordinator and runs a very interesting and successful program here in Middlesex County. So let's get started with Angela Monahan on enjoying edible flowers.
Good evening and welcome to Are You Ready to Garden, the last episode of the Are You Ready to Garden webinar series, Spring 2021. My name's Angela Monahan. I'm the Master Gardener Coordinator of Middlesex County. And a little bit about me, I attended Rutgers and obtained my Bachelor's of Science in Plant Science. And I also hold a certificate in medicinal and economic plants. So I'm really interested in how people use plants and how they can be utilized in your everyday life. So with that, let me share my presentation. So let's go over the outline for this evening's presentation. We'll discuss what exactly a flower is. We'll also talk about some trees and shrubs whose flowers are edible, a weed or not a weed, whether we think some plants in the landscape are weeds and some may not be. Also, we'll talk about some garden favorites, edible vegetable flowers, native flowers. I couldn't do a presentation without talking about some native plants here. And throughout the presentation, we'll discuss horticultural requirements as well as culinary uses of some of these flowers. Here's a great photo of this brushstrokes viola. Violas are very similar to pansies. They're in the same family. They're just a little bit smaller in stature. And this variety is gorgeous. We planted the seed back in January, and it has these really beautiful streaks of color throughout the petals of the flower. So if you're interested in growing a viola, I would highly recommend this variety. It's gorgeous, and they come in all different colors. You don't really know what you're going to get. This is a really great variety. Okay, so what exactly is a flower? The flower is the sexual part of the plant. So it's very showy. The petals attract pollinators, and without the flower, you wouldn't have sexual reproduction in the plant. Oops. So there are male and female parts of the flower. The male parts of the flower collectively are called the stamen. This can be remembered by breaking down the word, thinking stay, men. So there are two basic parts of the male part of the flower. You have the filament, which holds the anther, and the anther, which is a sac that holds the pollen grains. So the pollen grains are obtained within the anther itself. So the anther will dehisce or release the pollen when it's mature and ready. And the female part is called the pistil or carpel. Now, the pistil holds a few different parts. The stigma is the top of the pistil where it excretes a sticky substance that the pollen will land and stick to. And then once the pollen sticks to the stigma, it will create a pollen tube down the style, which is here in the center, and which also then leads to the ovary. And the ovary holds the ovules, which are essentially the eggs. Once the eggs are fertilized by the pollen, it will grow, the ovary will swell, and within that ovary, the seeds will form. So other parts of the flower, we had mentioned the petals. The petals are the showy parts of the flower that attracts pollinators, such as bees and butterflies. They can be all different colors and shapes. The sepal is the part of the plant, a part of the flower that protects the the petals and the sexual parts of the plant, of the flower. So the sepals are kind of like the buds. If you think of a flower, and before it opens up, the sepal holds together the petals and the sexual parts and protects that part of the flower before it opens. Sepals can also be very colorful. They can also look like petals. And then the pedicel is what holds the flower to the main branch. And then a bract is another section of the plant which can also be very showy. So things that have showy bracts would be dogwoods and poinsettias. I was trying to think that winter Christmas holiday time flower is the really showy part of the bracts. They can be red, they can be pink. So a lot of people think that with poinsettias and dogwoods, you're seeing the flower when you see those really colorful parts, but in fact, those are the bracts. Okay, trees and shrubs that have really showy, beautiful, and edible parts of. So let's talk about roses. Roses can be very high maintenance in the garden, so they do take a lot of care and a lot of maintenance, a lot of pruning. So before you add roses to your garden, make sure you do a lot of research in how to maintain roses. They do require some spraying, a lot of fertilizer, and a lot of pruning. So try to choose a rose variety that is a little more disease resistant. And the flavor of the rose petals tend to be more floral, so you get a lot of that scent. And floral scents of roses can vary to be more citrus, more flowery or floral. It's a hard way to describe it, but rose scents can kind of vary. So make sure you do a little bit of research. Maybe go and visit a rose garden and write down some of the varieties if you like the scent. So some things that you can do with rose petals. You can candy them, so coat them in sugar, let them dry, and then use them in confections. You can also make a tea. You can also infuse the petals in water and then make a jam. You could also make them into an ice cream, or you can just dry the petals and use it as a garnish. As you see here, I'm a huge fan of donuts. So here's a photo of donuts with a vanilla rose glaze and garnished with dried rose petals on top. So rose petals can be really great if you're trying to create a flourish in your confections and beautiful decoration. So let's talk a little bit about magnolias. Magnolias tend to have more of a cardamom ginger flavor to them, and they can be pickled. And then after you pickle them, they can be sauteed. You can also eat them fresh and saute them, maybe in a stir fry or something like that. And you can also make a syrup from the magnolias. Some more trees and shrubs, lilacs. Lilacs are actually edible. They have a very floral flavor. They taste very similar to what they smell like. You can make the floral blossoms into a sugar. I tried this and I was a little unsuccessful, unfortunately, but I think I learned the error of my ways. I took the flower blossoms and I buried them in the sugar, but the problem with lilacs that I've found is that the flowers oxidize very quickly. So unless they're very buried within the sugar, they're going to oxidize and have a very unappealing flavor to them. So make sure that when you go to make a sugar, a lilac sugar, that you bury the flowers all the way and that they're not exposed to air. Only leave the petal or the blossoms within the sugar for a day or two, and then you have to pick out the lilac petals after that so that you don't have any of that oxidation occurring. And that will the petals will impart the flavor within the sugar. And you can make sugar cookies, you could add it to your teas. Any way that you use sugar, you could use lilac sugar. You could also infuse it into a syrup. So taking that sugar and diluting it with some water in heat and then making a nice syrup so you can add to different cocktails or beverages in any form. You could also infuse it in honey. And you could also make popsicles, as seen here. This is a picture of boozy popsicles. So this person took gin and tonic, infused the lilac flowers into the popsicles, froze them, and had some boozy popsicles when they were out and about in the sun, and it's a great way to cool yourself off and enjoy an adult beverage. Or you can just do this without gin. If you don't partake, that's fine. You can just use a syrup, like the lilac syrup, and infuse the popsicles that way. Also, cherries. Cherries are edible. They're gorgeous. I love when they're in bloom. It's the signature of spring. And so cherries, since they're related to almonds, they actually impart an almond flavor into jellies or any cookies or things like that. So if you're looking for a very light almond flavor, this is a really great way to do that. So, a weed or not a weed? Many people try very, very hard to get rid of weeds in their lawn, but if you don't use herbicides, you may find some of these flowers in your landscape. For one, the New Jersey native flower, violets, which is the native flower of New Jersey, can be found in shady, moist, even dry soils. I have a ton in my backyard. I have a sandy soil, but violets can be found in a range of soils, and they do tend to like a little more shade, so if you have a shady area, you may find violets. They are just past bloom now. This is late May, so start looking for violets between mid-April through May, and they make a really beautiful syrup, which we'll talk about in the next slide. And they can be found to be a really beautiful purpley blue, or you could see down the bottom right here, a more variegated flower with white and purple accents. Another weed that you may find in your driveway or really compacted soils would be pineapple weed. Pineapple weed is actually related to chamomile, so it has a very similar taste and scent as chamomile, but with more of a pronounced pineapple flavor to it. So you could use pineapple weed as you would use chamomile. Also, red clover is a really wonderful plant, a really wonderful flower to use. An overall great plant. It can take nitrogen from the air and fix it into the soil. So it does help improve the soil if you're growing clover in your lawn or even as a cover crop. But for this application, I really enjoy red clover as a tea. And I even like to eat it fresh and raw. It does have a very sweet honey flavor to it. So just picking the blossoms when they're ripe is really great. Is a really great way to kind of give yourself a little burst of flavor when you're in the garden. And dandelions, you love them, you hate them. They can be eaten. All parts of the dandelion can be consumed. But here, if you're interested in eating dandelion, you want to harvest the flower earlier in the day when they open up, and you can take them, you can dip them in batter, and then consume it fried. So it can be fried similar to squash flower, which we'll talk about a little bit later, or you can even make a tea. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about violet tea or syrup. So you can make this in two ways. So you can make a violet tea by making an infusion with hot water, and then from there you could add a little bit of sweetener to make a syrup. So the first thing you're going to do is collect the flowers. I can see here I've collected the flowers. I collected a small amount because there weren't too many in my backyard when I went to do this. This is a little bit later in the season, so as we'll talk about in the tips later, you want to make sure that as soon as you see ripe flowers, you want to harvest them. So harvesting them in their prime is a really great way to enjoy flowers fresh. So when you're harvesting the flowers, make sure you rinse them lightly, make sure there's no insects or anything around the flowers. And then you want to boil water to exactly boiling temperature, which is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. And when you're making this concoction, you want to have a 1-to-1 ratio of flowers to boiling water. So I would use something like a shatterproof container, such as a ball jar or even Pyrex, something that you can pour hot water into and it won't shatter. So you want to sit and let cool for about 30 minutes. As soon as the water cools down, you want to strain the flowers from the water, and you'll be left with this amazing blue color. So that's your violet tea. If you're interested in making a syrup, you want to also create a 1-to-1 ratio of either sugar or honey. The honey is going to kind of cloud that blue color a little bit, but if you want more of a crystal blue color, add sugar, and that way you can make your syrup. You can add the syrup to all sorts of things, beverages and confections, anything like that. If you add lemon, the acidity from the lemon will actually turn the water from blue to pink. And again, you could add to any beverage of your choice. So here are some violet recipes. If you partake in alcohol, you can choose to make an Evian cocktail by adding about 2 ounces of gin to 3/4 ounce of freshly squeezed lemon juice. You can use a 1/2 ounce of violet syrup, homemade violet syrup, or creme de violet, which you can find in the liquor store. And then you can also add a little bit of maraschino cherry syrup. Luxardo is a really great cherry that you can do this with. And then maybe add some violets for garnish. So I mix all these together, combine, shake real hard, strain it and serve. Like I said, you can add a little violet as a garnish and enjoy your cocktail. Here's a photo in the center of what that violet water looks like. It's a beautiful blue-purple color. And then also, if you're just looking for a refreshing beverage, try some violet lemonade by adding, so you're going to make your violet tea, like in the recipe before. So you want to have about 2 cups of violets to 2 cups of water. You're going to infuse those violets, and then you'll make a simple syrup with the sugar and water, and then let that cool, add lemon juice, and add it all together, and you have awesome violet lemonade, and it's a great summertime beverage. All right, let's talk about some herbs. Most all herb flowers are edible. Some that I'd love to mention are basil, pictured top here. Top right is sage. We also have cilantro, not pictured here, but also edible. Dill, bottom left. Thyme, which is the next one over, lavender, and chives. And I found that if they're eating a lot of these herb flowers, that they do taste like the leaves that we use. So for most herbs, you're using the leaf of that plant. But if you're interested in eating some flowers, they do kind of taste like the leaves. They almost have, the flavor is even more pronounced and almost a little bit spicier. So sage is blooming now, and as well as thyme and chives. So go out there and harvest some of those flowers and mix it into a salad. You can infuse it in a vinegar, which you can create with a salad dressing later on. And with dill is great because we use that a lot of times to make pickles for cucumbers, right? Let's talk about a couple of garden favorites. A lot of people love daylilies. They'll be blooming within a couple more weeks. They are perennial and they have tubers, and that's how they reproduce. They can spread very easily through these tubers. They bloom early to midsummer, and like I said, they spread easily, so make sure that you contain them in a space in your garden. And they tend to have an asparagus-like flavor. Now, when you're harvesting daylily flowers, you want to make sure that they're just about to open. You more so want them at the bud stage, not when they're fully open, as the photo is seen here. So make sure that you harvest them when they are just opened in the bud form. And something that you can do that's very popular with daylilies is making a sort of fried version by dipping them in batter and frying them. Nasturtiums are really great. They're a great annual. They last pretty much throughout the summer. And if you're going to start nasturtiums from seed, you want to make sure that you scarify the seed. And what this means is you want to break the seed coat mechanically, so either nicking it with a little bit of a nail file, or you could soak them in water overnight. That way they have an easier time to germinate. So nasturtium flowers tend to have more of a spicy flavor, and they're really great mixed in with salads. Now, borage is another annual. It blooms late spring to early summer, it has a really gorgeous blue flower. Now, you don't really find blue flowers in nature. They're a little more rare than, say, your oranges or your yellows. So to have a blue flower that's edible is really great. And what you're going to do is, you'll take the pedicel, which is that stem that attaches to the branch. You'll hold that, and then you're going to pluck the anthers off, and then the anthers will pull away the petals as well because they're all connected, and then you have your borage flower. Borage flowers taste like cucumber, and again, great in salads. Okay, some more garden favorites. We have cornflower, another gorgeous blue flower. This is another annual that blooms early to midsummer. They're great in meadows. They're a really nice pollinator plant. Not native, but that's okay because they're still a good pollinator plant. They tend to like dry to moist soil, and they do enjoy full sun. You may also know this flower as bachelor button. And again, like the borage, it has a cucumber-like taste. Now, marigolds are ubiquitous throughout the garden trade, right? So this is another annual that is great in the garden. It's gorgeous. It blooms all summer long, especially when you deadhead, meaning taking off the dead flowers. And it likes dry to moist soil as well and full sun. And marigolds tend to impart a citrus, minty, astringent flavor. I, again, like these in salads by taking the petals apart and kind of sprinkling them into salads. And you could also incorporate them into things like pastas, into the pasta dough and things like that. Calendula is another annual that I tend to enjoy, and calendula is beautiful. It's blooming now. I've been harvesting calendula for a couple weeks now. I tend to like to dry the flowers and infuse them in an oil because calendula is really great for the skin. But you could also eat calendula. Again, salad's a really great way to do that. And they also impart a spicy, peppery taste similar to your nasturtiums. So here's a picture of these plants in action. So to the left, this is our herb garden of Thyme, Thyme, herb beds at the Earth Center. And this bed was filled with borage and nasturtiums and chives, and they had a really beautiful array, and just the way the nasturtiums kind of cascaded made it very attractive in this herb bed. To the right, this is one of our master gardeners, Rachel Weston, very talented in the culinary world. She does a lot of different things. She's a great gardener. And here is a photo from a couple years ago when we had our garden dinner. So we tried to incorporate all sorts of different vegetables and plants in a group dinner that we have during our Master Gardener class. So she made a really great salad, all picked from the vegetable garden. So you have your lettuces, the round things there are sliced radish. Those are the watermelon radish, which has a really cool flavor, really spicy and beautiful color. And then she also chose to harvest some of those nasturtiums and borage as well. So you can see it just makes the presentation so much more fun and lively when you're adding edible flowers to your salads. So let's talk about some vegetable flowers that are edible. Things like squash, which we'll talk about in the next slide. Also beans. We have some scarlet runner beans at the bottom center here. They're gorgeous and they're also edible. Peas. This is a blue flower pea that does a similar thing to violets where it can change the water to impart a very blue color. Gorgeous, and you can use it as a dye in all sorts of foods and And then also many of your brassicas have edible flowers. So when we eat things like broccoli rabe and broccoli, you're eating the flower buds, but once they open up, you can also eat the flowers. So things like radish, broccoli rabe, kale, mustard, bok choy, they all produce a flower in order to produce seed later on, right? So we have some radish in our garden, and I tried the radish flower just the other day. It tastes just like radish. And then we also have some kale flowers in our garden that's going to flower. It's called bolting when a lot of these plants go to flower. And taste just like kale. So it's really cool. So again, using them in a salad, you can use them as a garnish. It's a lot of fun. Okay, let's talk about squash flowers. So squash is a really interesting plant because within that plant, you have both female and male flowers that are separate. So flowers can have both male and female parts on the one flower, or it could have male and female parts on the same plant, but different parts of the plant. So it could have a male flower a male flower and a female flower. So with squash, this is the case. So you have your male blossoms and your female blossoms. Now, the female blossoms are what's going to produce your squash later on. So you want to make sure that you keep those intact. And the way of telling what a female squash flower looks like is, you can see top right here, that the ovary is enlarged, okay? So you're kind of seeing this bulge right after where the flower bud is. So that's how you can tell that is the female flower. And again, on the bottom right here, you can kind of see that there's an enlargement right after the flower bud. So you want to make sure that you're keeping those female flowers, but there are an abundance of male flowers. And the male flowers are the pollinators. So what happens is the male flowers are usually the first to bloom, and you can tell the male flowers because they have a long stem or pedicel that attaches from the main part of the plant to the flower. So you can see here a nice long stem, that's the male flower. And again, there's going to be an overproduction of male flowers, so you want to make sure that you keep a couple of the male flowers for pollination, especially when you start to see those female flowers bloom. So by keeping some male flowers, you'll allow for the pollination and the growth of squash, the squash fruit. You can take the male flowers, things you could do, you could fry them, you could stuff them with cheese, you could bake them, and you could also cut them up, chiffonade, into slices, and saute it up with some pasta, any sort of stir fry, and they're great. They have a nice kind of crunchy taste or crunchy texture, and just a nice kind of clean taste. All right, native plants. We'll talk about redbud in a bit and my experience with redbud vinegar. But first, elderberry. Elderberry has great fruit that people like to use in jams and syrups and such like that. But if you don't mind sacrificing some berries, you can harvest some of the flowers, and a lot of really great teas are made from the elder flowers. You could also make a liqueur. There's elderflower liqueur that's very popular, Saint Germain. A lot of people use that in champagne cocktails, which are really delicious. You can make it into tea, like I said. They do have great medicinal properties that have historically been used. And it's a really beautiful plant. Elderberry tends to like moist soil, so make sure that you have a space maybe towards the back of your property that you can allow it to spread, because it does shoot up runners. And so allowing this elderberry plant to grow, they do get very large, and they spread, and they like moist soil. Also, anisisop, which you can see bottom left here. Beautiful purple flower, great pollinator plant. The leaves can be used as a tea, but you can also consume the flowers as well, incorporating that into any teas that you're using. We also have sweet goldenrod, which is the yellow flower you see. This is Solidago odora, and again, the leaves kind of have this anise scent to them. That's why it's called sweet goldenrod. It blooms later in the summer. And you could also use the flowers when they're at their prime for a tea. Lots of medicinal uses there. Make sure you do your research. And boneset. Boneset is a beautiful late summer flowering white flower. You can see that bottom right here. And it does get somewhat tall, about 4 to 5 feet. And, beautiful flowers, another great pollinator. All of these would be great in most any garden. They can tolerate between dry and moist soils, and I highly recommend all of them. All right, so let's talk about my experience with making Redbud vinegar. So redbud is a beautiful tree species that blooms late March, early April. And again, it's another plant that can fix nitrogen in its roots. So it helps enrich the soil with nutrients. This is a really great plant in any landscape. It's a smaller tree, so it grows between like 15 to 30 feet. And it has a really beautiful spread and these gorgeous, gorgeous, like violet, hot purple color flowers. And you can tell they're in the same family as peas because the flowers do have a pea shape. So really neat plant. I used equal parts vinegar to water. So it was for me, I made like a half cup vinegar, half cup water, just to kind of dilute the vinegar a little bit so it's not as pungent of a flavor. I used apple cider vinegar, or ACV as people call it, but you could also use white vinegar if you want a clearer color vinegar. And then you want to make enough of that vinegar water solution to cover the flowers that you harvest. And with trees, with this redbud tree, the flowers are abundant, so you shouldn't feel too bad taking off most of the flowers, or not most of the flowers, but most of the flowers on a stem. And then you want to actually, after you cover the flowers with this vinegar solution, you want to put it in a jar, let it sit maybe in your cupboard or pantry for about 2 weeks, and about every other day or so, you want to lightly shake the jar. So that way you're kind of shaking it up, you're moving the flowers around, and what the solution does, it extracts the color. It has like a light kind of cucumbery flavor, kind of pea flavor, and it's gorgeous. I mean, you can see the bottom right picture here after I strained off the flowers, and it's a really beautiful light pink color, and I'm excited to add it to some really flavorful salads this weekend. And you can drink it and mix it with honey, making sort of an oxymel. You can add it to beverages and things like that. All right, some more edible flowers. Phalaenopsis and Dendrobia orchids. You see these flowers in a lot of garnishes in high-end restaurants. So Dendrobia is beautiful. You can see the photo here. And we also have sunflowers that are edible. Pansies and Johnny Jump Ups. The Johnny Jump Up is a native. That's that little Johnny Jump Up is the pansy-like flower. The bottom right here, it's covered in weeds, but that was in a field. So that's really neat that they come up, and they're a great pollinator, or they're a great host plant for some specific butterflies. So some tips and tricks. When you're harvesting flowers, you want to be 100% positive in your ID when foraging. So the best way to start off with using edible flowers, I would recommend, is growing them yourself so that you know where they're coming from and you know what they are. You want to make sure that you do not harvest any edibles along roadsides or where pesticides have been sprayed. So if you're seeing, dandelions or even the violets in your lawn, but you or someone in your family has sprayed any sort of herbicide, you really don't want to eat those plants. You want to make sure they come from an area that has not been sprayed because you do not want to consume those herbicides. And flowers are seasonal. So you want to understand when flowers are at their peak so that you can harvest them at the right time. And you want to harvest flowers as soon as you notice that they're in their prime because they're not going to last. Either it's going to get too hot, you're going to get an intense rain or wind, and the flowers can go away overnight. So knowing when they're at their peak and just when you see them, harvest them. And then also use them right away because I made the mistake of waiting a little too long, and my first batch of violet water didn't really work out because the flowers were a little bit old and they were past peak. So you want to make sure that you harvest preferably in the morning when they're just opening up. So that's a really great time to harvest, is when they're just opening up, kind of earlier in the morning. And you want to use your flowers within 2 to 3 days because they don't last. They're very delicate, and You want to make sure by using them right away, you're going to have the peak flavor. Also, use everything in moderation, right? So you don't want to overconsume different flowers, and everything in moderation is a good way to learn about what different flowers taste like. And you also want to research some recipes from trusted sources. There's a lot of people out there that say they know how to do things, but just do a lot of research and know who to trust. And you want to follow the directions, because if you miss a step, you might not get the best flavor out of your concoction. You want to make sure that you're sanitizing all surfaces and vessels before you use them, especially jars and lids and things like that. You want to make sure they're nice and clean so you don't grow any mold within your concoction. And you want to label and date everything. I make sure that I put, a quick label and a date on all of my jars, so that way I know when I made it and there's no confusion as to, is it time to strain that vinegar, or do I need to wait a couple more days? And I really like to use our kitchen calendar to know, hey, this is the time that you need to strain. It gives me a reminder, because I'm a little bit all over the place, and I need to be reminded of when things are ready. So you also want to keep an eye on any infusions. Again, you want to make sure that you're looking for any sort of like funkiness, any mold growth or anything like that, and kind of shake it as needed. You don't want to shake too hard like you're shaking a martini. Just lightly shake your concoctions to make sure that the infusion is working through the flowers. And then have lots of fun and explore different recipes and florals. Any questions? This is a great photo of another of our Master Gardener's bunny. You can see how marigolds can be interplanted with your vegetable crops, and they just bring, a really beautiful array of colors to things like your cabbages and a lot of your brassicas. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll take any questions that you have.
What a nice presentation you gave.
Oh, great. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. We're out in the vegetable garden. We're working hard.
Oh, that's fantastic. So we got some questions for you.
Okay.
Yes. Do you have any recommendations of trusted sources for this topic?
So edible flowers. I would say nurseries. There's a really great nursery called Well Sweet Farms. They're more so in North Jersey. They have really great herbs and edible flowers. They have a really great variety. And I would say a lot of your local nurseries, you always want to ask if they spray pesticides on their plants. That way you'll know if those flowers are safe to consume.
Are all lavenders edible?
As far as I know, yes. I think some will probably taste better than others. So I would do a little bit of research and find which lavenders are best for culinary uses. There's a lot of different varieties out there, so just do your research.
Are there vegetables that can double as ornamental plants?
Sure. I mean, you can make kind of any vegetable an ornamental. There's a lot of really cool ornamental peppers out there. They grow smaller peppers in all different colors. So I would say a lot of your ornamental peppers can be very attractive. Anything that has a different color that's different than what you normally find. There are purple bell peppers out there. There's green striped tomatoes. There's all sorts of things. You just have to kind of look in some of those funkier nurseries and catalogs, and you'll be able to find some different, more ornamental varieties.
When using these flowers in tea, vinegar, etc.,
Yes.
using the entire flower or just the petals?
It depends on the flower, such as chamomile. You can use the whole flower. So plants in the Asteraceae family, such as chamomile, sunflowers, plants like that. The true flowers are kind of that yellow center, but what you're seeing are the petals, and those are the outside. But you can put all of that into a tea to make an infusion. So I would say yes. If you want to use an infusion, make an infusion for tea, you can use the whole flower.
Another one is columbine. Is columbine edible at all, to your knowledge?
Yeah, columbine, you want to stay away from. Most of the parts of the columbine are not edible, and they're actually poisonous, and they contain compounds that can affect your cardiac system, so you really want to stay away from those.
Someone did ask, are all rose petals edible?
As far as I know, yes. I think different roses, since they have different fragrances, some will be better than others. We have some roses here that's and honestly, I don't know the varieties of these, but they're very nice and fragrant. Roses are going to impart more of a floral scent. So I really like this rose here. That's one of my favorites in the garden. It's a climbing orange rose, and I love it. And I've taken this rose and I've made it into an oil. I've infused it in an oil after drying the petals. But as far as flavor goes, you also want to make sure with roses that if you're going to spray them, because you do need to spray some sort of fungicide on roses, that it's going to be safe for use to consume. So if you don't spray them, that's even better. But you want to make sure, like I said in the tips, that you're not spraying the flowers before you consume them.
We'd love to see that rose.
Okay. Unfortunately, these varieties of roses are not labeled here in the garden. But this is a beautiful orange climbing rose, and it's my favorite rose fragrance in the garden here at the Earth Center. If you like the scent of a particular variety, you could try a little petal and see what it tastes like. So, this one kind of has more of a citrusy scent to it, so that may impart a more citrus flavor. But just making sure that that hasn't been sprayed with pesticides. But we have not sprayed these, so these would be safe to consume.
Now, there's a question about the teas you mentioned. How long can you keep the dried flowers in order to make tea?
So it depends on the flower. Chamomile does tend to last longer, for example, than other flowers. That can be kept. Let's say I harvested chamomile last spring. I used it for about 6 months, but I think with chamomile probably a little bit longer. You also want to smell the flowers and make sure that they still smell fragrant. Some flowers do dry better than others, like rose petals dry a lot better than, say, like violets. Violets don't dry as well, in my experience. But yeah, I would say that just making sure that the jars that you place them in are sealed, and that there's no moisture getting in.
Someone's asking if they can visit the Earth Center.
Sure can.
You sure
Yeah.
can. The Earth Center is in a beautiful Middlesex County park, Davidson's Mill Pond Park,
Yep.
42 Riva Avenue in North Brunswick, New Jersey. It's got normal park hours, kind of dawn to dusk. So you can explore the whole park, beautiful trails and woods and fields, and of course our gardens as well at the Earth Center, which is in the park.
Yeah, the gardens, especially the vegetable demonstration garden where we're working tonight, we're open to the public Saturday mornings from 9:30 until 12:30. So you're more than welcome to stop by and check all the herb beds we have, all the vegetables we're planting, and some of our other gardens as well.
Yeah, we'd love to see it all out at the Earth Center. Another question is regarding, do flowers need to be dried before infusing them, I guess, in vinegar maybe?
Not in vinegar and not in water necessarily, though you can use dried flowers to infuse in water and vinegar. But if you're going to infuse them into an oil, I would recommend at least wilting them for I would say like a good 24 hours, or even dehydrating them totally, because oil is hydrophobic. So if there's any water left in the petals, then you can the oil can become like acrid. That's the word I want to use. And it won't make a really great infusion. So making sure that the petals are wilted or totally dehydrated before infusing them into an oil is going to be the best way for infusion for those petals.
Well, I think we might be caught up on questions. I don't know if you'd like to chat about the upcoming Master Gardener program for a bit.
Right now, we are able to have our volunteers back for our hands-on portion of the Master Gardener program. Part of the program here is it's a year-long program. In the fall and in the winter, we are in the conference room where we have different speakers come in and talk about topics
various topics each week. And then there are exams, but they're open note and open book, so don't worry, it's not too bad. And in the spring and the summer, we come out to the vegetable garden, and as you can see here, this is our vegetable garden. We have people working real hard. The Master Gardener interns learn everything from setting up irrigation, laying down black plastic mulch, and other different types of mulches and their uses, which they're doing tonight. We'll also be planting tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants this evening. And you learn proper harvesting, proper planting techniques, seeding, everything that you want to know about growing a vegetable garden and its care and maintenance you would learn in the Master Gardener program. So if you're interested, you can email me at angela.monahan@rutgers.edu. Yeah, we're really excited for this upcoming year, and we hope to hear from you.
But just to remind you, we have a day program and an evening program. And you don't have to be a Middlesex County resident to take part in our program. So if our program works better for you, just let us know, and we accept folks from all over the state.
We invite you to also support our local agriculture. You can support Middlesex County Grown by visiting this website here, www.tinyurl.com/midcoungrown. Or you can just go ahead and use the QR code here. And we have a listing of farmers throughout the region that provide fresh local produce for you.
Just want to remind everyone, this was the last episode of Are You Ready to Garden this season? And I know there's a lot of returning customers, so I'd like to thank everyone for taking part.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. And thanks to everyone who participated this year in the program. Thank you to our loyal listeners and viewers. And I want to thank Dave Smella and our whole team for all their efforts at putting this together throughout the course of the year, and especially our Middlesex County commissioners and all of our supporters throughout the state who support Cooperative Extension and the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station. We wouldn't be here without all of their support coming together. If you want to be involved with any of our programs, please reach out and contact us. We'd be happy to provide more information. And we wish everybody a happy growing season. Take care, everyone, and stay healthy. Have a good growing season.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.